Between 1933 and 1955, Albert Einstein was a professor of science at Princeton University. One day he came into class, he handed his assistant a stack of tests. The tests were then handed out by the assistant to the students. Once the tests were completed and the students had left, the assistant came to Albert Einstein and said, "Sorry, Professor, but that test looked very familiar." Einstein said, "Not only is it familiar, it's the exact test we gave the exact students last year." Somewhat bewildered by this answer, the assistant said, "How and why can we give the same test to the same students?" Einstein simply replied, and this is a true story, "Because the answers have changed." I'm going to walk through you here in a very abrasive 9 minutes, a personal story how I went from designer to consultant, from consultant to founder, and founder now to venture builder. Throughout this journey, how I used the creative toolkit that I learned at university to adapt and survive and thrive in these different non-design environments as the answers were no longer the same. As I left university, each one of these is a big jump. I am changing essentially entire environments or different careers, stacking on. Each jump is compounded in responsibility and complexity, and yet I'm using my design skills in each one. I left university and went straight into freelancing. Now, this was 15 years ago, before Fiverr and that existed. Freelancing then was you literally came into a new company, into a new project, often on a project that was facing lots of difficulty, and you would work on that project for 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. I would then do that again and again and again. I operated this way for 3 full years. What I learned was I was in a very uncertain environment. So I had to learn how to rapidly adapt to change. I worked for drama schools, analysis, banks. I worked for Coca-Cola. I did work for Deus Ex Machina, motorcycle companies. Each week, a new team, a new company, and a totally unknown plan to me. What I learned was, after trial and error, was that I had a design skill that I could use in this environment, which was divergent, convergent thinking. I'm sure if you work in brand here, you're very familiar with this idea. The idea is you start with a core idea, you expand that out into many variations of the concept, and then you work that down into a working idea. For me, this was about trying to figure out what success looked like each time I entered a new company and a new environment. In uncertainty, the designer's advantage is this ability to do structured exploration. I was in rapid adapting to uncertainty in a new environment, and I was able to use a design skill to succeed in that environment. I did that for 3.5 years, ended up being a design manager in London, from which I was poached to come to Dubai. I worked for a management consultancy as an art director. Now, unbeknownst to me at the time, I was no longer in the same environment. Now I'm in a high consequence, complex environment. My job at my management consultancy was to jump into industries I had almost no experience in, work on them for as little as a few weeks, and then stand in front of the professionals from that industry, just say automotive as an example, and tell them what we think they should do with their products and services moving forward in the future. I quickly learnt early, thank God, that the design skill I had that I could use in this highly consequential, complex environment to thrive was first principles thinking. I learnt that in complexity, the designer's edge is signal extraction, or figuring out what matters and what doesn't. Even though the answers had changed, I was able to use this design skill to succeed in a consulting environment. What that meant was separating the signal from noise, basically. I had the advantage of ignorance, as you do when you jump into a new industry. I didn't have, or we weren't carrying forward the design frameworks or the thinking from that industry. We were able to look at it blankly and figure out what was going to move the needle. I also learned that this works very well for top-down and bottom-up thinking. We were able to present to industry experts after only a few weeks with macroeconomic industry trends. We were able to use first principles thinking bottom-up when we were at the granular level with the details of thinking about what to present to them. Now, I did that for 4.5 years. Then I jumped off, and then I completely changed the environment again when I launched my company called Startable. unbeknownst to me, and unfortunately, I had not realized that my environment had changed. I was now in a full ownership environment, but under extreme constraint. The previous lesson of applying design tool in a new environment of first principles was by far the most important, but this one was the hardest learn. I really suffered learning this one because from a high consequence environment, the answer was perfection. If you're going to present an idea to an industry expert, the way to do that is to make it defensible by having a perfect answer. I took that into my next environment, even though the answers had changed. So I had to figure out how to lean back on my design principles once again, which was in constraint, the designer's advantage is decisive momentum. I needed to be moving fast. As designers, you will naturally understand this. We all grew up through our careers with lean principles, with iterative design, with fail-fast design. I remember very smugly presenting these concepts to legacy companies, but then I failed to implement myself when I moved into a different environment when the answers had changed now that I was a business owner. I figured out that where I was going was vastly more important than how I was getting there. As long as I moved, even if we started something and it failed, if we went up, if we went down, didn't matter as long as we were moving in the right direction. I was able to use the design principles of speed to finally figure out that under constraint, speed is the answer. Now, interestingly and uniquely, this actually brings me up to today's point in my career. 6 months ago, I started working on, and next month we are launching a venture builder inside of DIFC. Well, I will be managing partner. Now, this is a long way away from where I started as a designer. However, now that I'm slightly older and hopefully a little bit wiser, I'm able to realize in advance that I'm heading into a new environment. But I will be using my design skills, my design toolkit in this new environment to figure out how to survive. I am no longer receiving the tests. I'm going to have to be the person handing out the tests, designing repeatable answers. So at scale, the designer's advantage will be transferable judgment. What does that mean? So in real time, this is something I went through with myself. Throughout my career, the 15 years or so, the creative part of it, what I essentially was a brand man. Okay, what does that mean to be a brand man? Brand is strategy plus tactics, right? Who are you designing for? What are you designing it? Why are you designing it that way? Now, once you've finished creating your judgment of why the brand should be that way, you then have to transfer that knowledge to the company that you have designed that for, right? We do this with a brand system. Okay, as designers, we actually know how to think in systems. We have to transfer that knowledge to the company so they can then distribute it across their assets, regardless of what they are: text, tone, visuals, products, services. So what is a brand system? A system then is leverage plus repeatability. Therefore, as a designer, I believe I have the skills to design repeatable answers when I'm operating at scale, even though the answers have changed. Now, that was quite fast and aggressive, as is the spirit of today. So I'll explicitly say what I hope you take away from this. One is to inspire some of you to have the confidence as you move through your design career and out of your design career to things that are in parallel or you move on. Your design toolkit does not limit you just to design. You can use that as you move through. Your creative intelligence is transferable from industry to industry as you compound, and move up. It gives you the ability to navigate new environments even when the answers have changed. Thank you.